What's going on today, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Music Producer Hot Takes, where you give me your hot takes on Twitter or my YouTube community posts, and I respond to them in this video. Seems like we got a lot more responses than I thought we would, so I just picked the first 35 randomly, and I'm gonna do that for now. I may do the other 35 in another video. I might not. We'll see. Ben Jordan says, I'm starting to think a lot of lo-fi is a convenient excuse to not engineer your music properly or make it exciting outside of that cliche. While it is a convenient excuse, there are definitely lo-fi genres, and it is definitely somewhat easier to mix than a normal song, a non-lo-fi song. I feel like the term lo-fi has really lost its meaning as of lately. Well, not even just recently, but for a while now. I hear things get labeled lo-fi that are not even what I would consider lo-fi. I mean, I guess there's different types of lo-fi, but lo-fi hip-hop is the first one that usually comes to mind. And there's more of like lo-fi pop stuff and lo-fi house. While it is a convenient excuse, it is also just a byproduct of the type of genre it is. Since it's meant to sound more damaged and dusty, that means less correction is needed to get it sounding proper. At least proper for that genre. I feel like overall genres can be really constricting though. Like, if you know what a lo-fi hip-hop song is supposed to sound like and you're making a lo-fi hip-hop beat, you're not really going to try to do anything exciting. And that's true for, like, a lot of genres, especially the more specific it gets. Divine Architect says, too many kits serve samples that are already close to a finished song sound, when they should be giving you a great sonic platform to jump off and tweak yourself. I feel like that's sort of the purpose with drum kits. It's all meant to save you time, and if someone can help process it for you to get it closer to what would sound finished, then obviously that'll save you time. I mean, if I got a sample pack, I wouldn't want to have to be boosting 4 kilohertz here and compressing here, doing some multi-band compression, throwing a little bit of reverb, unless I absolutely had to. I mean, if you think about it, if you had to do that with every sort of beat or song you were working on, that'd be a lot of time wasted. I Know More Than You says, access is ruining music production, bring back gatekeeping. I mean, while I do get where you're coming from, because it does seem like there are a lot of people doing music production nowadays, and since anyone can do it, anyone can make beats, anyone can get placements, it just makes it harder for anyone to get anywhere doing anything with this. But I feel like music production overall is just supposed to be like a hobby at first, you know, something fun to do. You know, if it becomes like a profession, then that's the next step. I think a lot of people are looking at it too much as a profession that is fun, as opposed to something fun that can become a profession. I mean, I feel like to a degree, gatekeeping already exists in terms of like getting placements with large producers or rappers, or pretty much getting anywhere of substance in this industry, because it's pretty hard to get somewhere as nobody, you know, unless you happen to know the right people or you happen to pay the right people or you get lucky. It's Brandon says, hip-hop wouldn't be as popular as it is today if it wasn't for internet producers and type beats changed my mind. Because hip-hop became popular in 1979. That's when it first came to national prominence with the Sugar Hill Gang song Rapper's Delight. I'm definitely not reading this off the internet right now. I just happen to be looking this way. While hip-hop did become its most popular in the 90s, I would hardly say that the internet was the reason why. I do think it could be part of the reason why it's continued to sustain such a grip on its popularity. I don't know, I couldn't see type beats being the reason why hip-hop or rap are still popular. It's definitely helped sustain it though. I do think one way the internet has influenced it though is the fact that people can go online and see rap producers being like rich and famous, and they think that they want to do that, and it creates this feedback. It creates this feedback loop of people trying to attain that. But I think it was already popular way before that. This could be true for any genre though. It's either Jorge or George. George, I'm just gonna say it the way a white man would say it. George Louis Ray says it's a waste of time and money, and I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's definitely a hobby or fun thing first, and then it can become a profession after that. If you look at it as an investment, then it's always going to be a loss until you get to a point where you somehow quote unquote make it or get somewhere. If you're looking backwards while you're trying to go forward, I think it'll always look like a waste. Sentience and Flux says, type beat producers are fucking up the game for anyone who wants to sound original. I think this is kind of true for anyone doing rap productions, and they're trying to get their beats out there and they sound different. But at the same time, I think type beat producers are just following the format that works. There's not really a real way for people to search for beats on YouTube. Like if you just type in beat, it's pretty fucking hard to find like a different beat. Like you're gonna find a beat that's just like a replication of another beat. And if you write type beat, then you can at least find something similar to what you're going for. but it's pretty hard to find an original sounding beat. I wonder what happens if you type in original sounding type beat. Where does that take you? I wouldn't say it's the type beat producer's fault though. It's really the algorithm and the way that people have kind of catered towards it, and that it's kind of stuck in that infinite loop of type beats being the only thing that people look for. I still think you could be a type beat producer and make something that does sound a bit different, but obviously you're going to still be stuck to whatever search term you're trying to go around. I think if you use more vague terms, then you could probably still be like a lot more original or unique sounding. You know, like atmospheric type beat or something like that, or I was going to say poverty type beat. How about hellish landscape type beat? So Twitter type beat. Splattermain says, Drift Funk is okay. In parentheses, I'm a Drift Funk producer. No, it's not. Vuda Beat says, it might be me, but I just can't tell the difference between WAV and MP3 files. The only thing I know is MP3 takes up less space on your computer. I think it's definitely a lot more obvious on a good monitoring system or a good pair of headphones. The real difference between a WAV and an MP3 file is that a WAV file is uncompressed and an MP3 file is compressed. Now, it means it's going to take up less space, but it means it's also less accurate and there's less quality to it. Now, I think this comparison illustrates it pretty well here.
So I'm still recording into the Shure SM58, directly into the Focusrite 2i2. Do you think this clip is a WAV or MP3? I am now speaking into the Shure SM58, which is plugged into my Focusrite 2i2. Do you think this is the WAV or the MP3 file?
The second one doesn't sound as high quality, so that one's the MP3 file, obviously. It's hard to describe, but it just sounds like there's a lack of depth or less detail in the sound. Again, it's not really obvious unless you're listening on a good pair of headphones, so. And I wouldn't even say it's that obvious. Sean Mariani says, one melody per beat is fine as long as the melody is good. I feel like people sometimes don't get enough context in these sort of comments. Is there like a chord progression there? Like, what are we talking about exactly? Is it a chord progression plus one melody? Or are we talking about just a melody, no chord progression? Because yeah, one melody, one chord progression, yeah, that could work fine. I've even heard just one melody and just a bass line and drums, and I've heard of like good beats like that I've wanted to use or other people have wanted to use. I guess if it's memorable, you know, if it's memorable and it has like some sort of catchiness to it or something that could kind of hook people in to make them want to do vocals on top of it, then I could agree with that for sure. I don't think every beat should be like that though, because then it's just a matter of chord progression melody or just melody and it's done. Sometimes having more than one melody or having like counter melodies that work against each other, like more interesting or different, you know? Okay, Queso says, trap is beginning to feel outdated. Now to me, it doesn't feel outdated because there isn't really something to compare it against that makes it feel outdated. I guess the only thing I could think of that would make me feel that way is maybe like hyperpop or something like that, but those drums are still a lot of the time still trap related. Like they're basically still trap drums, just faster. So to me, it doesn't feel outdated. It does feel like repetitive though at this point. I don't agree with the exact wording here, but I do get the sentiment of what you're saying. DJ Suzanu says, AI is going to take all the beat makers' places in 10 years. You know, it's possible, especially for these sort of type beat producers. I mean, it could get to a point where it just takes a loop and then generates similar loops to that and then just slaps random drums on it. Look at me, I'm probably giving them ideas right now. But it could just like slap random drum loops on top of it on like an AI generated melody. And then just like put like a bass line following along or like have like a randomly generated bass line that's in key. And yeah, it could be done. I mean, already there's AI for a lot of things, generating melodies, generating drums, you know, Drum Monkey. We all know how good that one is. So I do think it's possible. I don't think it'll replace all music though, but it could replace type beats fairly easily. Ruby DeBerry says, too much reverb can ruin a song. Like this, or maybe more like this. Wait, this is a video. I mean, obviously, especially if you put it on the wrong thing. I feel like this isn't really a hot take. Like, yeah, that's just truth. That's why the dry wet knob exists. That's why changing the decay time exists. Too much of a good thing can be bad. Google user says, RIP Space Effect VST. Does anyone remember that? I do not, but we're gonna take a look at it right now and see what we think of it. That was not the Space Effect VST, just for clarification. I think this is what he's talking about. If it's not, then oh well, we've reacted to the wrong thing. Oh my god, that was ear rape. I can see why this thing isn't around anymore. Definitely some harsh sounds. I mean, this video was posted in 2013, so make of this what you will. I think I've heard enough of that. Fuji says impulse responses are better than reverb. The thing is an impulse response for reverb is just going to be more realistic. Algorithmic reverbs are generated through an algorithm. Impulse responses are meant to simulate being in a real location. You could say they're quote unquote better. They're definitely more realistic sounding. Fawn says hi-hats are bad. I feel like, again, there's not enough context here, but trap hi-hats, you know, they can be bad. I don't know. I feel like people are focusing a little bit too much on the beats and not enough on the overall songs. Because I'm still not bored with like rap music or like more melodic rap music. Personally, I'm not bored with that stuff yet. Like I still really like stuff like Blade, Young Lean, Thai Boy, Cyber. There's lots of really good artists that still use like trap type of beats. Oh, another one would be Joey. But I feel like if the vocals are interesting, then the beats don't really, not that they don't matter as much, but if you stop focusing so much on like the way a lot of the beats sound similar and more so on like the overall and finished product, then like you stop thinking about the hi-hats so much. That's my opinion on trap hi-hats at the very least. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about though. If they're not talking about trap hi-hats, then I don't know what to say. Laylel says, I feel that production tutorials aren't really evolving. A lot of the newer ones just repeat shit I already know. I think there's a certain point where you stop learning as much from production tutorials. That's why I stop watching them as often unless I see something that intrigues me or I'm just like, I wonder what they mean by that. You gotta think about it this way. There's a lot more views in it when it's trying to teach something basic. Because if you're teaching something basic, you're going to be able to reach more people. You know, not everyone's at an advanced level. A lot more people are at a beginner level than they are at an advanced level. So you're going to get a lot more views off a beginner's video. Plus, the more niche and more technical you get, the less people are going to be clicking on it. Like, regardless of whether or not there were a lot of people. It's just more boring. Emar Beat says, I used a drip plugin once and got a Janet Jackson placement. God is good. I'm beginning to think this one might be a troll. Fenny says 808s are overrated and overused. I mean, at a certain point though, I feel like there's only so many types of basses. I feel like it's the same sort of thing as what I was saying about the trap hi-hats earlier. If you really just focus on that in particular, on what's happening in the beats and not what's going to happen in the overall finished song, then you can think any sound is going to be overrated and overused at a certain point. I definitely really like respaces too. But, I mean, even then, I'm like changing up between a respace and an 808 sometimes, you know? Dario Susu says, taking breaks from production give me my biggest boosts in creativity and confidence. The more I obsess over this hobby, the more heady and lame my music gets. I definitely agree with taking breaks can give you a more creative perspective. I probably mentioned this in another video before. Sometimes these videos might be a little bit overlapping. I come back to skating or when I come back to making beats after not doing it for maybe like a week or two, sometimes I come back with a new approach and start thinking of a different way to approach things, like new tricks, new types of melodies and stuff like that. I get less obsessive about the things we've already done, thinking more about what can be done. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but my theory is that when you're doing something constantly, you start to look through things with a magnifying glass, whereas if you give it some space, you might start to see it from a longer, further away picture. Tenth Eye says, there's a difference between people who make art and people who just make music. I don't know if I don't know if I understand what he's saying in this one. I would definitely agree if it was like people who make art and people who make beats. I would say, yeah, I could see that, because a lot of times with people who make beats, it's like a mass production sort of thing. You're just like making stuff, the same sort of stuff over and over that's like only slightly different. I feel like musicians are artists too. That's why it's often described that way. If you're talking about someone who makes like visual art, and people who make music, it's like, yes, there's a difference. Like, you're doing different things. I don't know. I wasn't really sure how to answer this one. There's my shitty answer, though. Luli says, what really makes a song cool and interesting and listenable is your love that you put into the song. Many people are searching for the answer to good music and plugins, analog gear, different techniques, which are also part of the craft. Many people don't look for the answer within themselves. This sounds like some hippy-dippy shit to me, which is why they will never make a really good song, only when they open their heart. But many have lost their heart, so they won't get the chance to do so. I feel like feelings are overrated in music. Having feelings when producing music can definitely help you find the right thing to like that's appropriate for what you're trying to say, but I don't think like having feelings will automatically make your music good or more relatable. You know, if you don't know how to translate that into something tangible in the music, then it's not going to matter. Like if you're really sad and you go play the keyboard, it's not going to automatically make it good. I'm not really sure what you're saying about the lost the heart thing. I don't know. You lost me there. Malik Keelam says, DAWs don't inherently sound different, but the way they handle clipping and distortion does vary. You know, they actually can sound very, very slightly different. I would actually add on this a bit further by saying, one thing that makes them sound different actually is their workflows. Like the workflow in FL and Ableton is totally different. And if you were to do the exact same sounds in each one, it'll sound very, very similar. But the way you would handle each sound, each DAW could cause a very different result. It may lead you to go down a different path than you wouldn't have otherwise. I was going to talk about this aliasing thing with the different DAWs, but I kind of just decided against it because it's really complicated. Each DAW can handle sample rate conversions slightly differently. Some may introduce a bit of aliasing, but a lot of times this aliasing or artifacts are like very inaudible. For instance, this one on the screen here, this is at like a negative 120 decibels. You would probably never hear. There's like no way you could hear that. But anyways, yeah, I wouldn't want to really get into that. Master VSB Production says almost every tear out dubstep song has the same rhythm because producers would rather spend more time in complex screechy sound design than actual composition and musicality. I honestly don't even know what a tear out dubstep song is. Let's look that up. I mean, right off the bat there, those two songs had a different rhythm in the drop. We'll check a couple more. Must just be listening to different things because I mean I'm not noticing that trend here, but this is all stuff uploaded to this specific YouTube channel as well too. Produced by Cuck. Is that, am I saying that right? There's no way I'm saying that right. Says, while headphones and studio monitors are great for mixing, it's fun to mix on shit speakers sometimes. It's sort of an ear challenge. The real hot take is if you know a general reference for the sounds or drums you're using, you can mix on anything, even just your laptop speaker. I think the real advantage to mixing on different things is just hearing it with a different perspective. With a different frequency response, like every monitor speaker has, you're gonna hear it slightly different. I think the real problem with mixing on something like a laptop speaker is you won't be able to hear the low end as much, so you won't, if you have to cut the low end, you won't know. You're not gonna have a reference for like, there's too much 20 hertz, for instance, or 30 hertz. I mean, I guess if you want a challenge, I guess you could do that, but the problem is like you won't be able to see some of the challenges as well. Okay, we're back. Okay, Future Sound says, I would love to share my hot takes and opinions, but sadly this is the internet, so I will refrain. Good thinking. Anthony says, there's no way I'm saying that correctly. You don't need third-party plugins to make a cool and well-produced song. Yeah, you can make something good without third-party plugins. I think the thing with third-party plugins, it kind of depends. It depends what you're doing specifically, you know? For instance, vocal line, you may need that if you're trying to line up a variety of vocals together. Scalar can help with like some music theory. Not all DAWs have a good auto tune. Damn you, FL Studio. I do think some synths sound better than the stock DAW synths, but is it a matter of it ruining the music? No, it just sounds a little bit better, you know? Also, a lot of them have better presets, obviously. Sam Madden says basically the same exact thing, so we'll just skip over that. Sam Phelps says something very similar. We're really paying for the presets, not the plugins. You know, with some plugins, I would agree for sure. It depends. Yeah, it really depends what you mean by that. Because with Infiltrator, on one hand, I do sort of agree, but on the other hand, I'm like, where would you get this functionality other than with Infiltrator, you know? I think you're paying like 50-50 for the presets and the plugins. It depends on what we're talking about, I guess. Because with Infiltrator, I wouldn't agree, but with some synthesizers, I may agree. I wouldn't agree with this in the case of like paying for a third-party compressor or limiter or something, you know? Andy Wilson says, plugin GUIs don't really matter. Just move every parameter in the plugin has and listen to what it's doing to the sound. Fancy plugin GUI tells you nothing about how it sounds. It tells you what the developers prioritize. Well, it doesn't mean that they prioritized the sound of it less than they did the graphical user interface. I mean, because they could put a lot of effort into both of them, you know? They're not mutually exclusive unless they're on a really tight time frame, you know? You know, on one hand, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to add anything to the sound, but at the same time, like, I can't be stuck looking at Reaper's default plugins, you know? I can't look at that all day. I'm going to want to shoot myself in the head. But definitely, like, don't write off a plugin because it doesn't have the best graphical user interface. But at the same time, if the graphical user interface is so bad that you want to rip your eyeballs out, then, you know, you may not really enjoy using it very much. I think for some people it matters more than for other people. Apothecide says, people who call themselves mastering engineers but don't own any analog mastering gear should not, I think you meant to say, be called mastering engineers. On one hand, I do agree, but I do think with a mixing and mastering engineer, like, it's all in the ears. You know, you could have analog gear and be the worst mastering engineer of all time, you know? There's a lot of software that does a job just as good. I think it really depends on the sound you're going for. I mean, and obviously there's mastering engineers engineers that use software that are terrible too, but I think it really can depend. Digidog says, I'm scared that the only people who appreciate electronic people are people who make it. That's wrong. Have you ever been to a rave before? Almost no one there makes music. People that shame producers for not using isotope plugins need to be sent to a Chuck E. Cheese full of kids that are fighting over the last token. I can't tell if this is a joke or not, but I've never met a person shaming someone for not using an isotope plugin. Spectre says, pirating DAWs usually leads to people to purchase the product later and supporting the company. I think it depends on the person, but I do agree somewhat. I mean, I don't want to confess to anything here, but I've definitely done this in the past and ended up buying something because of it. So I'm not sure if that's me confessing to anything, but it's definitely me saying that I agree. I do think sometimes the trial period that you get from a plugin or a DAW is not long enough to determine whether or not you want to pay for it. Matthew Kirshner says, the real elephant in the room for music is that a lot of what we obsess over is completely unnoticeable. Most people would struggle to point out a genuine analog synth versus emulation. This goes for EQing, mastering, live performances too. I definitely agree with this one. I think we may have talked about this in one of the last producer hot takes. The melody you play matters a lot more than whether or not it's a genuine analog synth. You know, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the mixing and mastering engineers earlier. Having analog gear doesn't matter as much as your ears. You know, for instance, people will obsess about the smallest things in their mixing, like, oh, there's a small click here, oh, the reverb could be dialed back like 2% or whatever, and it's like, really, is that going to matter for someone who's listening that's never mixed a record in their life? They're not going to notice the difference. Like, I'm not saying everything doesn't need to be as close to perfect as possible, but sometimes you can spend too much time on that and not enough time just making a good song, you know? Lucid Jason says, Jay Dilla is a legend because of what he did in the 2000s, not the 90s. So he's definitely had some legendary eras in both of those periods. Me personally, I do like what he did in the 2000s more than the 90s. Some of my favorite records from him are in the 2000s, such as Rough Drafts. Donuts is really good. Welcome to Detroit. Not sure how I forgot J-Lib, Champion Sound. I think his sound overall in the 2000s was more inventive as well, too. It's hard to say if people perceive him as a legend more so from that period, though, or the 90s. Because in the 90s, he was purely producing for, like, Far Side, A Tribe Called Quest. Can't remember any more off the top of my head, but I do agree with this as well too. Okay guys, that's it for this episode of Producer Hot Takes. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to check out my second channel if you haven't. I've been uploading there every single day lately. I'm trying to get monetized over there. Lately I reacted to Kyle Beats' reaction to my video, and I reacted to Av McCree's video reacting to my video as well too, as well as some other things. May upload a vlog there, may go on this channel, don't know yet. Anyways, I'll see you guys there or over here. Bye.
Incorporated.